There's been a couple of new additions to the global controls. When you press down the metronome button, you can use the Q level encoder for setting tempo in 1 BPM increments, and the metronome button still has its default functionality as well. When you press down the record quantization button, you can use the nudge buttons for setting a new record quantization value. The new value will be shown in the status bar. And again, this button still has its default functionality as well. Alright, also in terms of the status bar, when you're switching between modes now, the name of the selected mode will be shown in the status bar. Default mode is the same as before. Navigation mode is the same as before. Drum mode's been redesigned, and we'll cover that in its own section. User mode is the same as before. Clip mode is a new mode, and we'll cover that in its own section. Next is scale mode, and this is basically the same as before, except when you're selecting scale types now, you'll notice that some of the scale type buttons are green, and those are indicating common scale types: blues, chromatic, major, and minor. So it just makes those easier to locate. And also, when you're selecting scale types, the name of the selected scale type will be shown in the status bar. Alright, chord mode is the same as it was before. And then learn mode is basically the same. There's just some slight changes. You can still learn chords by playing them from a second controller, but you can also learn chords that are contained in a MIDI clip. So to show you that, I have a clip here with a chord in it. Alright, and to learn that, I'll just activate learning and then play the clip. Alright, now it's assigned. You've also got some new transposition controls. You can transpose in semitones. You can also transpose in octaves. First of all, you now have 3 submodes: default, 16 levels, and then sequence. In all of the submodes, you have some of the same controls. Here you can switch between the 3 submodes. Here you have velocity controls, and then the scene launch buttons choose which part of the drum rack you're controlling. Right now I'm in the default grid. I can move up to the grid above it, or to the grid below it, and you have 6 of those 4x4 grids to work with. In the corners you have last pads, and these will trigger whichever pad you hit last. Alright, and these are also lockable. And to show you how that's useful, take for example, I like this kit, but there's some sounds in this kit that I like this bell for example. What I can do is assign this bell to a last pad and then lock it in, and now no matter where I go in the grid, that sound will always be accessible. In order to show you the rest of the functionality of the drum pads, I'm going to select a clip that I made earlier, and notice that when I did that, some of the drum pads lit up. And what that's indicating is that the notes those pads send exist in this clip. So it's basically just an easy way of seeing what's going on in your clip. Alright, and the pads can also give you playback feedback as well. Alright, now on the side here, you've got a note mute button. The way this works is you press this button down, plus a pad, and it'll mute the notes associated with that pad. Alright, and you can unmute all with Shift plus mute. The button underneath that is note erase, and that'll erase notes for the portion of time that you hold it down for. So I'll erase some of these hi-hats. Alright, and finally over here you have note delete, and that'll just delete notes altogether. In the 16 level sub mode, the pads on the left work just like the drum pads in the previous mode, except they also select the pad for the 16 levels pads to play. Alright, and the 16 levels pads give you 16 levels of velocity control over the selected pad. In the sequence sub mode, the pads on the left work just like in the previous modes, except they also select the pad to edit with the step edit pads over here. Alright, so to better demonstrate this mode, I'm going to select a blank clip here and just build up a simple sequence. Alright, so I'll start with a clap here, turn my velocity up, add a kick. Alright, now so far I've been using fixed velocities, but for the shaker I'm going to put in here, I want to randomize the velocity a little bit, so I can do that here. Alright, so I've got a simple 1-bar sequence there. To extend that, I could press Shift, and then up here you choose which part of the clip you're editing. I'm going to set that to the 2nd bar so I can make some changes there. And then here you can choose which part of the clip is looping. I'm going to choose the 2nd bar so I can listen to the changes as I'm making them. And then I'm also going to use the copy and paste features over here. I'm going to copy the 1st bar and paste it to the 2nd bar. Alright, so now I can make some changes to it. Alright, now for this hi-hat, right now I'm working purely with 16th notes, but you can zoom in to work with 32nd notes as well. So I'm going to do that. This mode has 3 sub-modes, 2 for chopping and then 1 for chromatic playing, and all 3 of them share some of the same controls. First of all, these controls switch between the 3 sub-modes. This button will turn the clip's loop on or off. This button is a clip toggle. This will stop the clip if it's playing or launch it if not. We'll come back to this control in a second. These controls are for transposing or for detuning, and both are resettable as well. In the first sub-mode, which is chop 16, you have 16 pads which would be assigned to 16 evenly distributed start points based on the length of the selected clip. So it basically splits the clip into 16 parts, and then you could trigger the parts from the pads. So to show you how this works, I'll play a clip all the way through, and the second time around I'll make changes to it, and I'll also add a drum beat just to give it a bit more context.
The place is here and the time is now. Look and the time now. Look and the time is now.
The next sub-mode is chop 32, and it's basically the same as chop 16, except it gives you 32 start points to work with. To show you this, I'm going to switch over to this drum track, and we'll chop that up a little bit. Alright, so as you can see, it works on MIDI clips as well. In both of the chop sub-modes, by default, the first pad will always launch from the very beginning of the clip, so position 1.1.1, like so. Alright, but in some cases you're going to want to use different start times. So that's what this button here is for. It allows you to set customized start times. So, for example, I'll set the start time halfway through the clip, and then hit this button to store this as the new start time. And the status bar will indicate that I've stored this and where I've stored it and the clip's name and such. Alright? And now this button will launch from halfway through the clip. Alright? So I'm basically just chopping up half the clip. Alright? And at any point I can reset so I can go back to launching from the beginning again. Alright, and you can set and reset those on the fly as much as you like. The last sub-mode is chromatic, and here you can transpose clips. This side does ascending pitches, this side does descending pitches. First you have default mode, where the track control section does its default functions. Next is sends and volume. By default you'll be in sends, where you can control the first 8 sends on the selected track. These buttons here will move left and right between tracks. This button will reset sends to their default value, and then this button will switch to volume mode, and here you can control the volume of the 8 tracks in the selected bank. Next is device, and here you have a second lockable device control section. So this allows you to control 2 different devices from the apC. To show you how that works, I'm going to lock this section to this beat repeat rack, and then move this section to the analog warmth rack. So now I can control each one. Alright, these don't necessarily have to be on the same track, I'm just doing that for this demonstration. Alright, with the buttons up here, you can move left and right between tracks. Here you can reset device parameters, and if you hold down the lock button and press this reset button, you can randomize device parameters. Next is clip/user and MIDI modes. By default you'll be in clip/user, and here you can control the start time, end time, and overall position of the clip's loop. Here you can transpose or detune. Alright, the bottom 4 encoders are user assignable, and they function like endless encoders, just like the Q level encoder. Alright, with the buttons down here you can move left and right between tracks, you can toggle the clip's loop, and here you can switch to MIDI mode. Here the encoders are set up to send out standard MIDI messages, which most MIDI instruments support, whether they be plugins or hardware, but not all of them do. In particular, none of Live's instruments support these messages. But to give an example, I have my motif rack here. Alright, and I can control the volume, pan, cutoff, resonance. Here I can control the attack and the release. Alright, here I can scroll through patches. And with these buttons I can move one by one through the patches.